The 1950s were supposed to be simple: drive-ins, jukeboxes, and the dream of suburbia. But beneath the polished image of that decade was something darker: fear of nuclear war, paranoia about spies, and a growing obsession with what might be lurking in the skies above. Out of that tension came a wave of movies that didn't just entertain, they shaped the way we imagine the future. These weren't just cheap creature features. They were bold experiments that gave us aliens, monsters, and machines that still inspire Hollywood blockbusters today. What makes them unforgettable is that decades later, people are still watching, rewatching, and even remaking them. They didn't just predict the future. In some ways, they created it. And in this countdown, we're diving into the top 10 greatest 1950s sci-fi movies ever made. Films that are still trending, still relevant, and still blowing minds today. The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. If one film defined what 1950s sci-fi could be, it was The Day the Earth Stood Still. Released in 1951, it wasn't just another alien invasion story. It was a bold reflection of the times. The world had just survived World War II. The Cold War was escalating, and the terrifying shadow of nuclear weapons hung over everything. When Klaatu's saucer landed in Washington, audiences weren't just watching fiction. They were confronting their deepest fears on the big screen. What made it groundbreaking was its message. Instead of portraying aliens as mindless monsters, Klaatu arrived as a messenger of peace, warning Earth that its obsession with war and destruction could lead to its downfall. That twist forced audiences to question themselves. What if we were the real threat? In the middle of an era obsessed with patriotism and paranoia, that idea was shocking, even dangerous. And then there was Gort, the towering robot who could wipe out entire armies with a single beam of light. Even today, his silent presence remains one of the most iconic images in science fiction history. Add in the unforgettable phrase, Klaatu Barada Nikto, and you've got a movie that carved itself into pop culture forever. That single line has been echoed in everything from Star Wars to Army of Darkness to The Simpsons. But the film's influence didn't stop there. Its director, Robert Wise, later went on to direct West Side Story and Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And you can see the DNA of The Day the Earth Stood Still in everything from E.T. to Arrival. Even the 2008 remake with Keanu Reeves, whether you loved it or hated it, proved that Hollywood still considers this story too powerful to leave behind. More than 70 years later, the film still feels urgent. Its warning about violence, technology, and humanity's future hasn't aged. It's only become more relevant. That's why it continues to trend, taught in film schools, and referenced in memes, and ranked on greatest sci-fi lists again and again. But while The Day the Earth Stood Still gave us a moral warning wrapped in sci-fi, the very next film on our list took us into uncharted territory, combining futuristic imagination with jaw-dropping visuals that changed Hollywood forever. Forbidden Planet, 1956. If The Day the Earth Stood Still was about warning humanity, Forbidden Planet was about unleashing imagination. Released in 1956, it wasn't just another B-movie. It was a revolution. At a time when most sci-fi films were shot on small sets with rubber costumes, Forbidden Planet came out swinging with dazzling special effects, widescreen color cinematography, and a story that felt decades ahead of its time. Set on the mysterious planet Altair 4, the film followed a group of space travelers who discover a reclusive scientist, his daughter, and the remnants of an ancient, vanished civilization. But underneath its adventurous surface, the story carried weighty themes: human ambition, hubris, and the dark corners of the subconscious. Inspired by Shakespeare's The Tempest, Forbidden Planet proved that science fiction could be more than monsters. It could be art, literature, and philosophy wrapped in spectacle. And then came Robbie the Robot. Unlike the mindless robots of earlier films, Robbie had personality, wit, and even humor. He could cook, carry, and even make sly jokes, setting the template for every charming robot we've loved since, from R2-D2 and C-3PO to WALL-E. He was so popular that he reappeared in other films and TV shows, almost becoming a star in his own right. The film's groundbreaking electronic score, one of the first of its kind, was another game changer. Created by Louis and Bebe Barron, it was unlike anything audiences had ever heard. Eerie, experimental sounds that made the alien world feel alive. That music still gets sampled, studied, and celebrated by modern composers. But what really cements Forbidden Planet as a timeless classic is its influence. Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek, openly admitted that his vision of starships, alien worlds, and crews exploring the unknown was inspired by this movie. Without Forbidden Planet, it's hard to imagine the sci-fi boom that followed in the 1960s, from Star Trek to 2001: A Space Odyssey. Nearly 70 years later, the film still trends in retrospectives, sci-fi rankings, and fan discussions. Its effects may look quaint by modern standards, but its ambition and creativity are undeniable. It didn't just push the genre forward, it blasted it into orbit. But while Forbidden Planet showed us the wonders of exploration, the next film on our list turned that optimism into paranoia, revealing what happens when we start to fear our own neighbors. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Few movies captured the paranoia of the 1950s quite like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. On the surface, it was a simple sci-fi thriller about strange pods replacing humans with emotionless duplicates. But beneath that eerie premise lay a story that spoke directly to the deepest fears of its time. Released in 1956, at the height of the Cold War, the film quickly became known as an allegory for conformity and loss of individuality. Some critics saw it as a warning against communism. Others thought it was a critique of McCarthyism and America's obsession with rooting out un-American behavior. Either way, the message was clear. The real danger wasn't just aliens. It was the idea of losing your identity and free will to something bigger, colder, and more controlling. What made the movie so unforgettable was its atmosphere. Director Don Siegel created a creeping sense of dread, where ordinary neighborhoods and familiar faces became terrifying. The pod people weren't monsters in rubber suits. They were your friends, your neighbors, your family, stripped of everything that made them human. That made the horror feel personal, and decades later, it still resonates. Its ending, bleak, shocking, and unforgettable, was unlike most sci-fi of its day. Instead of triumph, audiences were left with a chilling sense of doom, a feeling that survival was uncertain. That tone broke Hollywood conventions and helped the film stand out as one of the most daring releases of the decade. And clearly, its impact never faded. The story has been remade multiple times, first in 1978 with Donald Sutherland, again in 1993, and even in 2007 with Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig. Each version adapted the paranoia of its own era, proving that the central idea is timeless. Whenever society feels uncertain, Invasion of the Body Snatchers comes back into the conversation. Even today, people reference it when talking about politics, social control, or even technology's impact on our individuality. Terms like pod people have entered pop culture as shorthand for mindless conformity. That's how deeply this movie burrowed into the public imagination. But while Invasion of the Body Snatchers terrified audiences by turning neighbors into strangers, the next film on our list took the terror to a global scale, showing humanity fighting for survival against an invasion straight from the skies. The War of the Worlds, 1953. When H.G. Wells wrote The War of the Worlds in 1898, he probably never imagined that more than half a century later, his story would become one of the defining films of the 1950s. Released in 1953, this adaptation took Wells' vision of Martian invasion and supercharged it with dazzling special effects that left audiences stunned and terrified. Unlike earlier alien films that leaned on cheap costumes and stage tricks, The War of the Worlds was a true Hollywood spectacle. Its Martian war machines, sleek, hovering craft armed with devastating heat rays, looked unlike anything moviegoers had ever seen before. The destruction sequences, with cities erupting in flames and soldiers vaporized instantly, were so intense that the film won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects. For 1953, it was nothing short of groundbreaking. But beyond the visuals, the story hit close to home. With the Cold War in full swing, audiences saw the Martian invasion as a mirror of their own anxieties, an unstoppable threat that could obliterate civilization in a heartbeat. The idea of cities reduced to rubble wasn't just sci-fi, it was a reflection of what people feared nuclear war might actually bring. The movie's influence has never really faded. In 2005, Steven Spielberg directed his own adaptation starring Tom Cruise, bringing Wells' story to a new generation. Even that film drew heavily from the imagery of the 1953 version, proving just how powerful the original had been. And when fans today talk about the history of alien invasion movies, from Independence Day to Cloverfield, The War of the Worlds is always part of the conversation. What keeps it trending is that it's both spectacle and symbol. It gave us jaw-dropping destruction, while also capturing humanity's deepest fear, that in the face of superior power, all our technology and weapons mean nothing. That chilling reminder is as relevant now as it was in 1953. But while The War of the Worlds showed alien invasion on a massive apocalyptic scale, the next film on our list brought the terror a little closer to home, into the shadows of the desert, where humanity faced monsters born from its own experiments. Them, 1954. If one movie summed up the paranoia of the atomic age, it was Them. Released in 1954, it wasn't about aliens or spaceships. It was about something much closer to home. What happens when mankind's experiments with nuclear power spiral out of control? And instead of invaders from the stars, the threat came from the ground. Giant, mutated ants. At first, the idea might sound almost laughable. Giant insects terrorizing the desert? But on screen, it was terrifying. The film's opening sequence, with a little girl wandering in shock through the New Mexico desert, set the tone. Something unnatural had been unleashed. When the ants finally appeared, brought to life with massive animatronics and eerie sound design, audiences realized they weren't watching camp. They were watching a nightmare. What made Them so powerful was its timing. Just 9 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and less than a decade into the nuclear arms race, the movie tapped into the very real fear that radiation could change the world in unpredictable, horrifying ways. The ants weren't just monsters. They were symbols of mankind's own hubris, a warning about tampering with forces we didn't fully understand. Critics and audiences agreed. It wasn't just a hit, it became the first of Hollywood's giant creature movies. Its success opened the door for films like Tarantula, The Deadly Mantis, and even inspired the entire atomic monster trend in Japanese cinema, which gave the world Godzilla. In that sense, Them didn't just scare people, it reshaped an entire genre. Even today, it's remembered as one of the best monster movies ever made, not because of its special effects, which, by modern standards, might look dated, but because of its atmosphere and message. It's the rare B-movie that critics and scholars still analyze, and it regularly appears in greatest sci-fi lists. For fans of classic horror and science fiction, Them is still buzzing around. But while Them explored the dangers of radiation and the monsters it might create, the next film on our list took those fears in a more personal direction, shrinking them down to a single man facing an unthinkable fate. The Incredible Shrinking Man, 1957. By the late 1950s, sci-fi wasn't just about giant monsters and alien invasions anymore. It was about something far more intimate, the terrifying fragility of being human. The Incredible Shrinking Man, 1957, took that fear and turned it into one of the most haunting films of the decade. The story begins with Scott Carey, an ordinary man who is exposed to a strange radioactive mist. At first, the effects seem mysterious. His clothes no longer fit, his world feels slightly larger. But soon, the horrifying truth becomes clear. He's shrinking. Bit by bit, week by week, his body reduces until he's smaller than a doll, smaller than a toy, and finally fighting for his life against things as simple as a house cat or a spider. On the surface, it's a survival story, and one of the most inventive of its time. Watching Carey battle a spider the size of a house is still thrilling today. The special effects, miniature sets, giant props, and seamless editing were jaw-dropping for 1957 and still hold up remarkably well. But beneath the spectacle, the movie dug into something deeper, a man's struggle with identity, purpose, and the terrifying question of whether life has meaning when you no longer fit into the world around you. The ending remains one of the most powerful in sci-fi history. Instead of a typical Hollywood resolution, the film closes with Carey accepting his fate, not as a tragedy, but as a revelation. Even as he shrinks beyond human comprehension, he realizes that life is infinite, and that his existence, however small, still matters. For a 1950s sci-fi film, that kind of existential ending was unheard of. That's why The Incredible Shrinking Man is still celebrated today. It's not just a monster movie or a gimmick. It's philosophy disguised as popcorn entertainment. Modern filmmakers, from Steven Spielberg to Christopher Nolan, have praised its themes of scale, survival, and meaning. And when audiences revisit it today, it feels less like a relic and more like a timeless meditation on what it means to exist. But while The Incredible Shrinking Man turned inward, exploring the cosmos within, the next film in our countdown looked outward, toward the stars, and the terrifying possibility that visitors from another world might already be watching us. It Came from Outer Space, 1953. While many 1950s sci-fi films painted aliens as ruthless invaders, It Came from Outer Space dared to be different. Released in 1953, it was Universal Pictures' first major sci-fi in 3D, and one of the earliest films to suggest that maybe, just maybe, aliens weren't here to conquer us at all. Set in the deserts of Arizona, the movie follows an amateur astronomer who sees a spaceship crash and soon notices locals acting strangely. The explanation? An alien race is hiding in human form, not to invade, but to repair their ship and leave Earth peacefully. For audiences in the middle of Cold War hysteria, this was a bold twist. Instead of feeding fear, It Came from Outer Space hinted at understanding, empathy, and the idea that maybe humanity's biggest enemy was its own paranoia. Visually, the film was a spectacle. Its use of 3D was cutting edge at the time, with scenes of alien creatures and desert landscapes that leapt off the screen, giving moviegoers an unforgettable thrill. And while the special effects may look dated now, they were groundbreaking in 1953, helping the movie stand out in a crowded field of alien invasion stories. But what really made it endure was its mood. The desert setting gave the film a haunting, isolated atmosphere, and the alien point of view, shown through distorted, otherworldly visuals, made audiences feel like they were seeing Earth through alien eyes. That stylistic choice influenced later filmmakers, from John Carpenter to Steven Spielberg, in the way they depicted alien encounters. Over the years, It Came from Outer Space has remained a favorite among classic sci-fi fans. Scholars often highlight it as one of the first American films to present extraterrestrials as the other without automatically branding them villains. In an era defined by fear, that perspective was revolutionary. And even today, as UFO sightings and alien disclosure debates keep hitting the news, this movie feels more relevant than ever. It reminds us that sometimes the real monsters aren't visitors from space, they're the fears we project onto them. But while It Came from Outer Space showed aliens in a surprisingly sympathetic light, the next movie on our list went back to pure spectacle, combining UFOs, destruction, and groundbreaking visual effects to create one of the most iconic alien battle films of the decade. Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, 1956. If one movie defined the look of UFOs in pop culture, it was Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. Released in 1956, it gave audiences exactly what the title promised: sleek alien spacecraft descending from the skies, blasting cities to rubble, and humanity scrambling to fight back. But what set it apart from the countless alien invasion films of the decade was the genius of one man, special effects legend Ray Harryhausen. Harryhausen's stop-motion effects brought the flying saucers to life with a realism no one had seen before. These weren't static props dangling from wires. They spun, tilted, and glided across the screen like real machines. The sight of UFOs demolishing the Washington Monument and crashing into iconic landmarks shocked audiences, and those images have echoed through cinema ever since. Beyond the spectacle, the film tapped into the anxieties of the 1950s. The Cold War was in full swing, and the idea of sudden, overwhelming destruction from above felt all too real. Instead of nuclear missiles, the threat was saucers armed with disintegrator beams. The fear was the same: technology beyond human control raining down on ordinary people. The movie's influence has been massive. Decades later, you can see its fingerprints all over modern blockbusters. Roland Emmerich's Independence Day, with its alien ships hovering over cities before unleashing chaos, is practically a love letter to Harryhausen's imagery. Even the way modern UFOs are depicted in games, comics, and television owes something to this film. What keeps it trending today is simple. It's fun, fast-paced, and visually unforgettable. Sci-fi fans still revisit it for the effects, historians analyze it for its Cold War subtext, and UFO enthusiasts point to it as a classic that helped shape how the world imagines flying saucers. It may have been made in 1956, but its impact has never left Earth's orbit. But while Earth versus the Flying Saucers gave us destruction on a grand scale, the next entry took things in a different direction, introducing a creature from the stars so strange and sympathetic that it became one of Ray Harryhausen's most beloved creations. 20 Million Miles to Earth, 1957. By 1957, audiences had already seen their fair share of giant monsters and alien invaders. But 20 Million Miles to Earth stood out because it gave us something rare for the time, a creature you could almost feel sorry for. This film was another showcase for the unmatched artistry of Ray Harryhausen. His stop-motion work brought to life Ymir, a reptilian creature accidentally brought to Earth from Venus. Unlike the mindless beasts of earlier movies, Ymir wasn't evil by nature. He was trapped, confused, and frightened. An innocent being who lashed out only because humanity treated him as a threat. That sense of tragedy gave the film an emotional weight that monster movies of the era rarely had. The story followed Ymir's rapid growth from a small, curious creature to a towering figure rampaging through Rome. The climactic scenes, Ymir battling an elephant in the streets or climbing the Colosseum in a sequence reminiscent of King Kong, were unforgettable. Harryhausen's animation gave Ymir subtle expressions of pain, fear, and even loneliness, making him one of sci-fi's first truly sympathetic monsters. What makes 20 Million Miles to Earth timeless is that it wasn't just about spectacle. It was a cautionary tale about humanity's tendency to destroy what it doesn't understand. The film tapped into the 1950s obsession with exploration, space, science, and the unknown, while warning about the consequences of pushing too far too fast. Decades later, Ymir remains a fan favorite. Collectors still seek out figures and posters, film historians still celebrate it as one of Harryhausen's finest works, and monster movie fans rank it among the greatest creature features of all time. Even today, when audiences debate sympathetic monsters in movies like The Shape of Water or King Kong, Ymir's tragic legacy often resurfaces. But while 20 Million Miles to Earth gave us one of sci-fi's most heartbreaking creatures, the next film in our countdown became infamous for a very different reason. It wasn't remembered as a masterpiece. It was remembered as the worst movie ever made. And yet, that reputation is exactly what's kept it alive for decades. Plan 9 from Outer Space, 1959. Some films are remembered for their brilliance, others are remembered for their flaws. And then there's Plan 9 from Outer Space, a movie so notoriously bad that it became immortal. Directed by Ed Wood in 1959, this low-budget oddity threw everything into the mix. Flying saucers dangling on strings, cardboard gravestones, recycled stock footage, and a script that barely made sense. It told the story of aliens resurrecting Earth's dead to stop humanity from creating a doomsday weapon. The plot was clumsy, the acting wooden, and the production so cheap that audiences at the time laughed instead of gasped. And yet, that's exactly why it's still talked about today. For decades, Plan 9 has been hailed as the worst movie ever made, a title that ironically turned it into one of the most famous sci-fi films of the 1950s. Its flaws became its charm, drawing generations of fans who love it not despite its mistakes, but because of them. The film even carries a strange kind of Hollywood royalty. It was the final movie appearance of Bela Lugosi, Dracula himself, who died before filming was complete. Ed Wood, desperate to finish the project, used a stand-in who covered his face with a cape for the rest of the role. The result was bizarre, but it added to the movie's legendary status. Over the years, Plan 9 from Outer Space has been celebrated in documentaries, parodied in countless shows, and even remade. Tim Burton's Ed Wood, 1994, gave new life to its story, turning the film into a cult icon. Today, it's regularly screened at midnight showings, ranked in so bad it's good lists, and endlessly quoted by fans who cherish its awkward genius. The truth is, Plan 9 may not have been the movie Ed Wood wanted it to be, but it became something bigger. A cultural phenomenon that proved even failure can live forever in pop culture. And with that, our countdown of the top 10 greatest 1950s sci-fi movies still trending today comes to an end. But before we close, let's take a step back and see what ties all of these classics together. The 1950s gave us more than just flying saucers, rubber monsters, and Cold War paranoia. It gave us the foundation of modern science fiction. From the moral warnings of The Day the Earth Stood Still, to the visionary spectacle of Forbidden Planet, from the creeping paranoia of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, to the unforgettable camp of Plan 9 from outer space. These films didn't just entertain, they reshaped the way entire generations think about the unknown. What's most remarkable is how alive they still are today. They've been remade, studied, mocked, celebrated, and endlessly referenced. Their themes, fear of destruction, loss of identity, the dangers of unchecked technology, and the hope of survival, are as relevant now as they were 70 years ago. They weren't just stories of their time, they were stories ahead of their time. Without these films, there would be no Star Wars, no Alien, no Interstellar. They built the DNA of everything we now call sci-fi. And maybe that's why they're still trending, because deep down, the questions they asked are the same questions we're still asking today. What does it mean to be human? What's out there in the stars? And will we survive what's coming next? So the next time you see a blockbuster filled with aliens, giant monsters, or futuristic tech, remember, it all started here, in the flickering black and white glow of the 1950s. The real question is, which of today's movies will still be trending 70 years from now?